it became deafeningly quiet. I could feel a vignette closing around my vision. It was not a comfortable feeling. I wasn't sure if I was O2 toxing, if I had overbreathed the loop and I was succumbing to a hypercapnic event, so too much CO2. Wasn't sure what was going on.
Welcome to Dive Vlogs, where I take you beneath the surface to explore the wild, the unknown, and the unforgettable. I'm your host, Fino, and I've been diving for 17 years, exploring wrecks, caves, deep blue waters, and everything in between. Every dive has a story, and in this series, I'm sharing the ones that shaped me. Some breathtaking, some terrifying, and some that changed the way I see the world forever. If you love diving, caves, the ocean, adventure, or just want to experience the underwater world like never before, hit that subscribe button and dive in. Welcome to my dive vlogs.
Welcome back to my dive vlogs. Today we're talking about one of my latest dives with Doug Ebersole teaching me how to dive Hypoxic Trimix on a rebreather with two of my really good friends and dive buddies. It was an amazing experience. I learned a lot about gear management, gas planning, as well as physiology. It's a once in a lifetime type of experience. Highly recommend you get an instructor and go take this class once you are able to. It is game changing. Let's dive into it. Rebreather diving requires extreme care, attention to detail, as well as planning. It's not like open circuit recreational diving where you can just throw a regulator on, your BCD onto a tank and hop in the water and go, where the risks are minimal as well as the consequences of those risks are fairly minimal as well. You can always swim right up to the surface and get air within a reasonable amount of time. Rebreather diving, on the other hand, typically used for technical diving because that's really where it has its bread and butter of being an actual advantage rather than a disadvantage. Some of the disadvantages, and this video is by no means diving into rebreathers itself, just briefly overviewing them for you. Diving a rebreather requires quite a bit of training, cost, there's a huge financial investment, as well as time. Rebreathers give you a lot of time underwater. However, to set my rebreather up according to my checklist, which I follow checklists when I set up rebreathers, takes a good hour at least, depending on which rebreather I'm setting up. One rebreather is a little less complicated or has fewer components. One of them has a BCD integrated to it for a back mount rebreather. It takes a little bit longer to set that one up. So I can be going anywhere from an hour, hour and a half. If I'm going really slow and I have to repack, maybe that's 2 hours. So there are disadvantages with rebreathers. For this dive, I was running a rebreather set up for Hypoxic Trimix diving. It's a fairly common rebreather out there. I'm not endorsed by any brand, so they will remain nameless. It's not the one that you're going to see me building for you all. However, it is one that I have quite a bit of experience on. It was in a side mount configuration on this BCD right here, which I use for open circuit and closed circuit side mount diving within caves, which was the environment that we were going in. It's very difficult to manage all those bottles, even if it's a smaller 50 cubic foot like I had for the 1070 that we were diving. However, it can be limited on chest D-rings. It might be difficult to reach certain things. You're carrying quite a few bottles with you in order to have enough bailout to do it, which is a huge skill when it comes to rebreather diving. Every aspect of gear configuration when it comes down to these extreme exposure dives is critical. Where you have things placed, an inch or two of a D-ring being off might mean you are unable to reach it in a dry suit with a bunch of tanks on. It is absolutely critical that you have a system down that you are used to, comfortable with, and have trained with in order to be successful at these types of dives, and of course training you how to do so. Gas planning for Hypoxic Trimix is more than just having enough gas. It's having enough of the right gases. You can't always switch to the gas that you have with you. Hypoxic means it's not safe to breathe at the surface. You're not always able to switch to your back gas. Also, there's this crazy phenomenon called isobaric counterdiffusion. I'll put that up on the bottom here for those unfamiliar. Call it ICD typically, or IBCD, some people call it as well. That means it is isobaric, constant pressure, counterdiffusion. It's going across tissues. That is a consideration you have to deal with when you're diving high percentages of helium in your mix. Now, you might have been diving 1070 at the bottom. Doesn't mean you can immediately switch to a 50% or a 32%. You may actually have to have something like 50% oxygen, 30% helium, or 30% oxygen and 30% helium, and that's to limit these switches in high helium concentrations to low helium concentrations that you could experience on a hypoxic trimix dive. Now, all these considerations are things you have to learn to plan for. There are rules of thumbs, and I had a lot of questions when it came to this because there's not that much info out there. The book that you get with this course doesn't have all the answers. This is one of the first classes where you are going to see that. Now, I was super lucky to have an extremely knowledgeable hypoxic instructor, Doug Ebersole. He is also a practicing doctor, and he does a lot of things with hyperbaric medicine. On top of him being extremely knowledgeable himself, he's 100% willing and open to answer questions with "I don't know," or "I believe there's a study on that." I won't misquote it. I will give you the actual study. So when we brought up deep stops, our class together, he gave us the exact research that it came from. This is one of the peer-reviewed journal articles that Doug brought us. It's amazing to have an instructor that's not only extremely knowledgeable, but will also present you with where the information came from, how it was collected, and why we do things the way we do them. So the mixes we were using for this specific dive were 1070, 1845, 50% oxygen, and then 100% oxygen for our last deco stop. These mix of gases optimize the amount of bottles that we were carrying, so typically carried in an aluminum 80 because they're easier to manage underwater. It limits how many of those you have to take with you and ensures that you have enough gas in order to bail out from depth. An additional factor goes into that. We are diving in a cave, so not only you have to have enough for the depth, you have enough to bail out from the deepest and furthest is what we plan for, in order to be able to get back out without being able to go straight up, and then start your decompression as you're going up, based off of all that in and out mass. So there's a lot that goes into it. Ultimately, these were the gases that we chose to do this dive to right about 300 feet, just shy of that. Now, I can't have enough praise for Doug Ebersole, and he by no means is telling me to say this or sponsoring me to say this. This is not a review of his classes. It is simply, I was very engaged throughout all the courses. He bases all of his practices off of peer review research, which I personally loved. It wasn't just an instructor making things up. It wasn't just saying you do it this way because I've done it this way for 20 years and it's worked for me, or why is your hose pointed this way when it should be pointed that way type of deal. It was very much fact-based, science-based knowledge. Diving at this level is beyond the typical scope of most divers. Not only that, it's beyond the typical available knowledge that we have out there as divers. That's why things like these peer-reviewed journal articles were so important. There's so much information that's either close held by the military because it's research and then holds a strategic advantage for our military. At the Navy Experimental Diving Unit, where they do a lot of this discovery as far as what is safe, what isn't safe, a lot of that's close held, so we don't know the answers a lot of the time. Or the answers might be out there and we just can't get access to them. So a lot of these things have been passed down word of mouth, but it was absolutely great to have the peer-reviewed research in order to be able to determine what really is it that we are doing and why are we doing it. Can't harp on that enough. That was huge. This course was about 5 dives, 4 or 5, I don't remember exactly. I can check my logs here and I'll put them up for you in a moment, totaling around 6 hours of underwater time. The first day was all basic skills practice, making sure that we could swim without a mask on, find air and share it when need be, swim along a cave line and then gas share, turn around, switch positions, can you bail out, can you rescue your buddy? There were a myriad of skills that we accomplished on day 1, and the purpose of that was to knock out the skills at a safer location in order to then be able to go to the deeper location and not have to do skills with an increased risk without any gained advantage. Throughout this course, one of the biggest things I learned was about me personally and my own physiology. This is not anything a book can tell you. It's not something that you can watch and understand. It was simply me having to experience it to know how my body reacts to depth. The diving science is not precise. The human body, more exactly, is not precise. We do not fall into specific buckets of how we personally will react with depth. I experienced a moment that scared me, I'll be completely honest, something I never experienced before. On my first trimix dive on a rebreather, diving to around 200 feet. Now this was outside this class. It was a moment that I thought I was having some sort of physiological issues. Now, that was a one-off. I thought, okay, maybe I overexerted myself, maybe I had nitrogen narcosis, whatever it might have been. Now, this was something I experienced during our second to last dive in this course as well. We were going down the line on our very first deep dive during this class, and I started to feel my heart pounding, just absolutely beating out of my chest. In addition to that, sounds got quite a bit quieter. Normally on a rebreather, you can hear yourself breathing, you can hear a little bit of bubbles when you vent the loop. Maybe you can hear yourself breathing through the loop. Whatever it might be, you hear something even though it is quite a bit quieter. That all got silenced. It became deafeningly quiet. I could feel a vignette closing around my vision. It was not a comfortable feeling. I wasn't sure if I was O2 toxing, if I had overbreathed the loop and I was succumbing to a hypercapnic event, so too much CO2. Wasn't sure what was going on. Now, like any good rebreather diver, the first thing you do is you verify your PO2. It's something I constantly look at. And with this unit, you have ability of not only looking at 3 of your cells, which are always displayed, you also have the ability to pull out an additional display, which allows you to see your 4th cell and compare them all. Now, every single dive, I do a 1.6 PO2 check to make sure that my O2 sensors can sense when I am breathing a high percentage of oxygen or high partial pressure of oxygen. Now, I looked at all 4 of my sensors. They were all right at my set point where I wanted them to be. I knew that it was not a hyperoxic event, that I was not breathing too much oxygen. I did not feel my rate of respiration increase. It felt normal, which is a typical indicator of a hypercapnic event, but not always. You can suppress that. I wasn't exactly sure, and I was ready to bail out of my unit. Now, I slowed down. I was not the leader of this group, so I started to slow down, and I could feel myself become a little bit more accustomed to the feeling, and the feeling started to dissipate. Now, what I was actually feeling was narcosis. I didn't think it was possible to experience narcosis at 250 feet, breathing 70% helium. That is a ton of helium. My equivalent narcotics depth was right around 60 feet, give or take a little bit. I dive much deeper than 60 feet all the time and experience no narcosis. I've dove air to 150 feet in open water with very limited narcosis. Now, narcosis in a cave can feel like it's setting on earlier. That's why you limited your equivalent narcotic depth in overhead environments to around 100 feet. This is typical by most training agencies as what they endorse as safe. After determining through my instruments, my computer, as well as my additional sensor display, that my rebreather was in a normal operating state, my work of breathing was normal, and I did not feel like I was hypercapnic, I decided to continue and stay on the loop instead of bailing out and ending the dive. I don't know that this was the smartest decision, nor do I recommend that you make that same decision yourself. I know my body and my rebreather fairly well, and I made the determination that it was not malfunctioning and that I was experiencing some other physiological effect. However, based off of all the information that I had presented to me at that time, and having had experienced it once before in my normoxic training, I determined that I was in a safe condition, and so was my rebreather, to continue the dive. Now, when I talked to Doug about it, there are a lot of factors that can go into this. One is the rate at which you descend. The other is that carbon dioxide can also be narcotic. So in the fact that I was not leading the dive and was swimming maybe a little bit faster than I personally would have, there may have been more carbon dioxide in the loop. In addition to that, I was also diving a rebreather that uses a canister cartridge. Now, this is not something I typically do. This was a borrowed rebreather for this course, and this person who I borrowed it from preferred the use of cartridges. No big deal, I've dove cartridges all the time. I have, however, experienced less ability of a cartridge to absorb carbon dioxide when compared to a sorb pack. Now, granular sorb, in my personal experience, for me only, I'm not giving out advice, seems to work better, and this is just a seems, what I physiologically feel, better for me. I think all these factors, including the rapid rate of descent from the lead diver, then the more rapid rate of swim than I would have done at the 240 feet-ish depth, all contributed to me experiencing nitrogen narcosis, or just narcosis, blanket narcosis, we'll leave it at that because it wasn't just necessarily nitrogen, at that depth. Now, one of the key skills with diving a rebreather is being able to bail out and not use that rebreather while you're diving, funnily enough. Every rebreather diver has to be prepared at a moment's notice, a drop of a hat, be able to become an open circuit diver at whatever level you were diving that rebreather to. Along with that, this bailout skill that you perform is from the deepest, furthest penetration part of the dive. Where we were diving was Eagle's Nest in around Central Florida. Now, Eagle's Nest, the portion that we were diving, is called the pit. From that turn, you now have to be able to bail out and get out of that cave safely while open circuit. When you're diving a rebreather, you have three airspaces you're concerned with. You have your BCD, your dry suit, and your loop, which contains your lungs. When you're open circuit, you have three as well, your BCD, your dry suit, and your lungs, still three spaces. Now, when you bail out on a rebreather, you're separating one of those, and you actually have four that you're dealing with. You have your BCD, your dry suit, your lungs, and your rebreather, so you have one more thing to manage. It is an additional skill and requires extra practice and can be much more difficult in order to be able to get out of a cave safely. Not only that, it can be difficult to maintain neutral buoyancy for those that do not practice it. There's another life-saving skill that you practice called semi-closed rebreather, SCR for short. Now, what this means is when your rebreather electronics break, your oxygen sensors are no longer working, and you've determined that, you can still breathe off of your rebreather safely in most cases by performing a semi-closed rebreather skill. So that was excellent to see and practice and appreciate the difficulty of it and continue to practice it and get better at it in the future. I challenged my skills, my ability, and my knowledge throughout this course, and I put them to the test and got even better through the practice of it. Now, on our final dive was the dive that we went to 290 feet with a little bit of change on there. This was the dive that I got to lead because of my previous experience with the narcosis. We made the decision as a team that I would lead this dive to see if a slower rate of descent and slower swim rate would eliminate the narcosis that I was feeling. Now, when we did this, and in practice, it did. I did not experience the same physiological effects that I had on the first dive. A slower rate of descent significantly helped, as well as a slower swim rate was still very much helping me get accustomed to the depth at a better rate more suitable to my body. Key takeaways from this class are precision in your gear setup. What you have can always be better and always learn from other people. Gas management and gas planning was a huge area of consideration for this course. Lastly, my biggest takeaway was one about myself, and that was my own physiological ability to adapt to depth, as well as the effects that I can experience based off of that narcosis at the depths that we were diving. Rebreather diving at this level isn't just a skill set, it's also a mindset. To be able to successfully and safely conduct these dives requires the skills to go do it. It also heavily depends on the proper background knowledge in order to be able to safely plan it, in addition to making proper decisions when the time comes. There's a huge thanks that goes out to Doug Ebersole for being a fantastic instructor, as well as my dive buddies who are great friends of mine. It absolutely made this class one of the best classes I've ever taken, and I enjoyed every single second of it. What do you think about SCR versus bailing out? Is it something that you plan to use when you go dive, or are you simply going to bail out when you have a malfunction with your equipment? Let me know what you do and your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown, stay tuned, like, subscribe. There's more deep dives, caves, and expeditions coming your way.